Welcome to today's COVID-19 update. We're speaking with the Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Frank Anthony. Minister Anthony, again, thank you so much for joining us. If we could get straight into it, what is happening in Region 1 right now, Cubana specifically?
Well, as you know, we had a spike in cases in Quibana, and we have taken the relevant measures to contain the spike. We have medical teams on the ground. We have done the house-to-house sanitization. We have done education with the various households that are there. And of course, we have been testing the residents who are living there. We've had approximately 900 people who live in Quibana, and we have tested almost a third of those persons, and currently we have about 62 cases that are active. So the medical team continues to monitor everyone, and the idea is if anyone deteriorates, then we are able to identify those persons quite quickly and take them to the hospital. But so far, I think the measures that we have put in place are working. We expect that we'll have to keep those measures in place maybe for another week or so, and then we'll see a drop in the cases. We have noted that in the surrounding communities, that when we did testing around those communities, that we've also seen a number of cases in those communities, and again, we have started to take precautions. We haven't closed those communities, but we have taken precautions with house-to-house education, talking to people, doing sanitization, and those kinds of things. So we continue to be very vigilant in observing what is happening and providing guidance to the residents living in that area.
Earlier on, you had indicated to us that you had put in an order for the antigen. How is that?
I expect that we'll be receiving some soon. Maybe in another 2 to 3 weeks, we should be able to get those antigen tests. And as you know, they're different from antibody tests because this would actually check for the virus itself. So we'll be using some of this, and it takes maybe 15 to 20 minutes when you use it. We will, as soon as we get it, our intention is to deploy this more to the hinterland communities, so they will be able to do the tests on the spot, so to speak, or at the point where care is delivered. And we believe by doing so it would make a big difference. However, while we will be using the antigen tests, if there is any doubt that the physicians who are using this test would have, then they can always do the swabs and send it out for a PCR test. So we're not because we'll be doing antigen testing means that we will stop doing PCR testing. Antigen testing will just complement what we have. But I want the public to understand the difference between an antigen test and an antibody test, because antibody would appear after or during the period of the infection, and then more after you will see those antibodies remaining. So many times when you do an antibody test, and if it's positive, it would probably show that you had the infection, not that you have active infection right now, but maybe you had the infection because we're detecting the antibodies. So the best way of diagnosing the COVID-19 is either to use the PCR, which is the gold standard, or to use these new antigen tests that are coming out, right? So in that way, we have a better appreciation of what is happening in the acute stage of the disease and when people are most infectious.
All right. Minister, if we can touch on it briefly on vaccines. We know that there is a program in place
Mhm.
for when a vaccine becomes available, but just quickly an update as to what is going on in terms of the world and, actually getting a vaccine.
Well, as you know, there's a big rush to get a vaccine because most people believe that um, getting the vaccine is what would help us to exit the pandemic. Um, my understanding is that there are close to 203 different types of vaccines that are being developed. There are various stages of development, so quite a lot of them are in what is called the preclinical stage, meaning that it's an idea, they're working on it, they're testing it out in animal models and so forth. And then you have a number that is also in the clinical stage. Clinical stage, there are different phases, so phase one, phase two, phase three. Right now, there are probably about 9 to 12 vaccines that are in the phase three trials. And these are the ones that we have to look at because those that are in phase three trials, if they're successful, then the next step would be to green light them for the people to start manufacturing them. And right now, there's a global mechanism that has been established by the WHO, Gavi, CEPI. These global bodies have come together and created a mechanism called COVAX. So COVAX is a mechanism where they're getting money so that they can now pay for the best vaccine options. So through that mechanism, they've been looking at 9 candidate vaccines that are in the phase 3 trials. And whichever one is successful, their anticipation is that they can then use that trial as the basis for somebody to go manufacture the vaccine. And they'll pay for it. So it's really accelerating the movement from the research to getting it manufactured and making it available to countries. Through this COVAX mechanism, their intention is to have 2 billion doses of vaccine sometime next year. And once they're able to manufacture that, they'll distribute it across the globe. Now, Guyana, we are part of a group of countries that Gavi is supporting. There are 92 countries that Gavi would be assisting, and Guyana is one of those. So basically, the amount of money that you will have to pay COVAX to procure or acquire these vaccines, Gavi is taking care of a substantial part of that payment on Guyana's behalf. So they're assisting us in that regard, and we are very grateful to them for providing this assistance. Now, with the vaccines, there are a number of vaccines that there are different types of vaccines or different ways of how you can make them. So in this instance, we have vaccines that are made from the virus itself. So they're called live attenuated vaccines. Then you have some where they kill the virus and they use the virus to stimulate an antibody response. So you have modalities like that that are currently being worked on. Then you have vaccines where they take a part of the virus which they believe can trigger an immune response, and they use that to elicit that immune response. So there are a number of vaccines that use this methodology of taking a sub unit of the virus and use that to trigger that immune response. Then there are another set of vaccines that would use the DNA or the RNA from the virus or parts of it to trigger an immune response. And again, these are new modalities. So all these techniques, some of them have been the traditional one, like the live attenuated and the one where they kill the vaccine and the virus and then use it to trigger that immune response. These are the old techniques that have been used. But we have seen with the advance in biomedical technology that newer models are being developed, like the one dealing with the subparticles of the virus itself, or using DNA or RNA to trigger this immune response. These are newer techniques that are now being used, and they're able to develop them much faster. So, along with what we are currently doing in the world, we are also seeing an unprecedented use of new technology, new ways of doing things, and a faster way in which to get some of these vaccines ready. So, you know, it's a very interesting time in the scientific community because they are harnessing all the knowledge that we currently have and putting it to use in the fight against COVID. So, um, you know, we are learning as we go, but at the same time, we are utilizing new technology, new techniques to be able to get these types of vaccines. So everyone is pretty optimistic that we will have that vaccine sooner or later. But with the vaccine also, because of the speed with which all of this is unfolding, there are still some things that would have to be worked out. For example, whether the vaccine, you'll have to get a booster shot. For some of them, you might have to. In others, the type of storage that you will have, what temperature you would have to store these vaccines, because that also, if you have to use very cold temperature, like -80, then that limits the distribution of the vaccine. If it's -20, then you know. So all these things can affect how we deploy the vaccine when we get one that is meeting all these standards. So it is everyone in the scientific community, I think, they're very optimistic that we'll have that vaccine and that we'll be able to deploy it rapidly to countries.
Minister, as a medical professional yourself, I'm believing that, well, as you said, there are 9 that COVAX is considering. Based on your own study, because you have studied, this area is not strange for you. Which, aside from COVAX, choosing one, which one, if I can ask you, would you weigh on, as in the types that you just explained for Ghana? Because you're not only using the older techniques or the new one, but I'm asking more in a sense of storage, because as you rightly mentioned, all of that comes into play when you choose one.
Well, all the characteristics are not available right now, so they are right now, you know, there's still a long way to go in understanding all the different characteristics. So at this point in time, it might be difficult to choose one over the other. I guess the first set of things that we have to look at, which we'll know from the phase 3 trial, is those that are safest and those that are effective in stimulating that immune response. So that's the first 2 things that we have to look at. And of course, the regulatory bodies would have to ensure that whatever is done is safe so that human beings can get it and they wouldn't get infected and so forth. So safety is a big consideration, and then of course the effectiveness of the vaccine, because you don't want something that is not going to stimulate a proper immune response. You want something that is going to give you immunity so that if you encounter COVID-19, you'll be able to deal with it. So safety and the effectiveness or the efficacy of the vaccine is of utmost importance. So when you put that aside now, the other things, it's really about how do you get it out to people? How do you deploy it? And most of these vaccines, you have to store them at a particular temperature. So a lot of the vaccines that we use for children, we normally use maybe -4 to -8. And we are hoping that the vaccines that are currently under development would fall within this temperature range. And if it does, then the infrastructure that we have in the country for the children vaccines, well, then we can use that infrastructure. However, one and two of the vaccines that are currently under examination, we are hearing that you will have to store at -20, and in a few cases, they're also talking about -80. Now, that is ultra cold, and to be able to store at those temperatures will require specialized equipment, which can be very costly. So we'll be hopeful that we get those that we can deal with maybe at -4 to 8, and perhaps the -20, I think in some cases we can handle that as well. It would entail buying some specialized freezers to be able to keep those components, but it's something that is doable. But at -80, that's, I guess, is a totally different set of parameters that we'll have to consider.
Okay. All right, Minister, thank you so much for that. If we can just touch on the Ocean View facility, could you give us an update on that?
Well, our expectations are that this week we should be able to substantially complete the ICU at Ocean View. Most of the things are in place, and so the staff at the Georgetown Hospital and the contractors there are trying to finish off the ICU. So by the end of the week, we should have substantially completed the ICU facilities there, and then we'll start the process of transferring patients across to that facility.
What is the occupancy like again, just a reminder?
The wing where we have milder patients, we probably have about 20 or so patients there. But as we now bring other parts of the facility under operation, so for example, the ICU, we would be able to accommodate between 25 to 29 ICU beds, which is quite a large amount because our current capacity at Georgetown Hospital would be around 14. So we will have a substantially bigger ICU, and all the medical personnel and everybody would be available at the facility. So that's what we're working on. The overall bed in the Ocean View facility would be about 199 beds. So, you know, if we have patients that require admission, then we'll be able to keep them safely in that facility.
As we're on the topic of ICU, I know you have a special program for where all ICUs will be operating under a particular guideline. Could you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, we have a clinical group that has developed guidelines in terms of how to treat patients with COVID. So you have basically those who are asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic. You really can't do much there. And they don't really require any major treatment, or those who have mild symptoms. But those who have moderate symptoms, well, then you have to start monitoring. And if they require hospitalization, meaning that they're probably severe or critical, then they would need more specialized services, such as providing them with ventilation, providing them with certain types of medication. And we have trained our physicians to detect when you transition from one stage to another, and what are the parameters that you use to be able to determine whether somebody has moved from being at moderate risk now to being severe. And so once they decide clinically that this is what has happened, then the protocol changes and your actions would intensify in terms of what you need to offer and medications and so forth. So all of that has been worked out, and the doctors who will be working with these patients, they're well aware of these protocols. And because we are part of this global community where the knowledge of what is happening with COVID is shared almost on an hourly basis, new things are discovered. So keeping yourself apprised of the newer guidelines, newer techniques, this is done continuously, and our doctors have been following these things as well. So whatever we are providing here are almost on par with whatever else is happening in the best centers around the world, because this knowledge is shared and we are able to quickly take guidance from that. So, we'll continue to do this, and we'll continue to upgrade our guidelines and make sure that we are able to deliver the best care for our patients.
All right. In wrapping up, lastly, I just want to ask you for a quick update on the Diamond Smart Hospital.
Well, as you know, the Diamond facility is part of an arrangement that we have with 5 facilities, where we are now looking at all our health facilities to make them more resilient to climate change. And in thinking about that resilience, what we really mean is that some of our facilities we know are in low-lying areas, so they're prone to flooding. And if they're flooded out, then they can't offer medical care. Some of our facilities, they're using a lot of electricity. We feel we can cut that down by using renewable energy such as solar. Some of the facility we have been, when rain falls, the water, we just throw it away, so we have found ways of how to use that water back in the facility. So it's making these facilities more resilient to climate change. And we have started by retrofitting Diamond. We have almost completed Diamond. I'm hopeful that sometime in December we would actually be able to return back service at Diamond. And the contractor and our staff, they're working to make sure that that happens. But while we are finishing off the retrofitting of Diamond, we are also going to start the retrofitting of the Lenora Hospital. We've already done some preliminary assessments, and services that we are providing at Lenora we'll be transferring to some of the neighboring facilities, so that services are not too severely disrupted. So we would be working at Lenora, retrofitting that. And our intention is also to retrofit Mabaruma, Lethem, and Paramakatoy. So these are ongoing projects that we have to ensure that all these facilities become more resilient to climate change. And that is why we are calling them smart hospitals.
Okay. Well, Mr. Anthony, thank you so much for facilitating us once again.
Thank you.
That's it for today's COVID-19 update with the Honorable Minister of Health, Dr. Frank Anthony. Remember, for more information, you can log on to our website, dpi.gov.gy, and the Ministry of Health's website as well, health.gov.gy, and of course our social media platforms.